Zilpha Lowery vanished on an ordinary April morning, leaving behind only her purse, her car, and a silence that haunted Shadwell for years. Thomas Langley, a quiet school custodian with a hidden past, slipped away from town just 2 days later. For a decade, no one connected them, until a silver key clutched in Zilpha's lifeless hand unlocked a chilling story of obsession, secrecy, and a murder hidden in plain sight. Zilpha Lowery was the kind of person few noticed in a crowd, but everyone remembered once they met her. She lived alone in a modest brick house on the edge of Shadwell, a quiet North Carolina town where people rarely locked their doors and news traveled faster than cars. As the school librarian, Zilpha was gentle, reliable, and always early. Her mornings followed a strict routine: coffee at 6:30, out the door by 7:15, and in her office by 7:45 without fail. That's why when she didn't show up to work on April 16, 2011, the school secretary immediately felt something was wrong. By noon, concerned colleagues called the police. By 3 p.m., her abandoned car was found on a dirt road 7 miles out of town. The discovery was eerie. The car was parked neatly on the side of the road, not crashed or damaged. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no footprints leading into the woods. The only thing missing was Zilpha herself and her cell phone, which was later found to have been turned off just after 7:30 a.m. that morning. The area around the car was heavily wooded, and although search dogs and volunteers scoured the nearby trails, nothing was found. In the early days, theories came fast. Some whispered that Zilpha had simply walked away from her life. Others speculated about a secret relationship or a possible stalker. Her family insisted that she had no reason to disappear. She had no debts, no enemies, and had never missed a day of work in her life. Her garden was still in bloom, her house spotless, and her calendar marked with a dinner date with her sister that very evening. Everything in her life suggested she was planning to return home. The only eyewitness account came from an elderly neighbor who claimed to have seen a silver pickup truck slowly driving past Zilpha's house that morning. The vehicle idled near her driveway for a few minutes before disappearing down the road. At the time, it seemed too vague to mean much. Dozens of similar trucks drove through Shadwell every day, and no one could connect it to anyone in town. Still, police took note. Over the years, that single detail would become more important than anyone realized. As the weeks dragged on, the flyers that once covered every pole and window slowly vanished. The search team stopped assembling. News stations moved on to fresher stories. The case went cold. But for Zilpha's family and those who knew her best, the silence was unbearable. Somewhere out there, something had happened. They believed it wasn't just a disappearance. It was a crime. And they were right. It would take years before the truth emerged, but when it did, it would expose something far more disturbing than anyone in Shadwell ever imagined. 4 years after Zilpha Lowery vanished, the town of Shadwell had all but given up hope. Her name was rarely spoken outside of her family's home, and her case file sat buried beneath layers of unsolved reports. That changed on a foggy morning in the fall of 2015, when a group of hikers exploring a remote trail in the Nantahala National Forest made a horrifying discovery. About 60 miles from Shadwell, under a tangle of fallen leaves and moss, they uncovered a shallow grave. What remained inside was the skeleton of a woman, her body curled slightly as if in sleep. She had been buried with care, but not deeply enough to escape time. Local authorities quickly secured the area, and within days, forensic experts confirmed what everyone feared: the remains belonged to Zilpha Lowery. Dental records provided the match, and her family was notified. The announcement rippled through Shadwell like a long-awaited storm. For years, there had been no answers. Now there was a body, and with it, a second chance at justice. Investigators returned to the scene in hopes of uncovering something, anything, that could point to the person responsible for her death. Among the debris found with the body, one object stood out, a small silver key, worn but intact, clutched tightly in Zilpha's skeletal hand. It didn't match her house key or her car. It was unusual in shape, an older design that looked like it might open a locker or storage unit. For detectives, it was the first real lead since 2011. Someone had killed Zilpha and tried to erase the evidence, but she had left behind a clue. The question now was what the key opened and who it would lead to. Investigators launched a new phase in the case, cross-checking the key against dozens of local facilities, old padlocks, and storage rental companies. At first, they found nothing. Most units now use digital locks or newer keys. But one retired officer remembered a small, outdated storage complex just outside town that still used traditional locks. The company had changed ownership several times and records were incomplete. But after combing through stacks of handwritten documents, they found something. A unit had been rented under the name Thomas Langley from early 2011 until mid-2012, then abandoned. Langley wasn't on anyone's radar. There was no mention of him in the original investigation. Curious, detectives searched public records and learned he had worked as a part-time custodian at the same school where Zilpha had been librarian. He had left town just 2 days after she disappeared. No forwarding address. No job history since. Armed with this information, police obtained a warrant to open the storage unit. What they found inside would turn the cold case into something much darker. Dust-covered boxes, old furniture, and hidden behind a tarp, dozens of stolen items from the school. More chilling, however, were the plastic bins containing personal items linked directly to Zilpha, gardening gloves, a library ID badge, and a folder filled with candid photographs of her daily life, taken without her knowledge. It was no longer just a disappearance. It was clear Zilpha had been watched. And whoever was behind it had been much closer than anyone realized. The storage unit unlocked more than just a metal door, it opened the way into the twisted mind of a man who had hidden in plain sight. Thomas Langley had gone unnoticed during the initial investigation, likely because he kept to himself and worked the night shift as a custodian. He had access to the school building, knew the routines of staff, and had just enough familiarity with Zilpha Lowery to watch her without drawing attention. But what investigators uncovered inside that unit painted a disturbing timeline of obsession and premeditation. Among the most damning evidence were the photographs, neatly stored in plastic sleeves, sorted by date, and taken from behind trees, car windows, or through the blinds of public places. Langley had followed Zilpha for months, maybe longer. He captured images of her locking the school library doors, tending her garden, and walking to her car. Some were taken from so close it was shocking she never noticed. What stood out to investigators was the methodical nature of it all. Langley hadn't just followed her, he had studied her, learned her habits, and waited. One photo was marked with a date, April 15, 2011. The day before she vanished. In it, Zilpha stood at a crosswalk, her face half-turned, eyes squinting in the sun. That was the last confirmed image of her alive. Alongside the pictures were notes, lists, time logs, even crude maps of routes she often took. Langley had documented everything. Yet he never mentioned his name. No confessions. No clues as to what happened after she disappeared. Just silence and meticulous records. Detectives now had a name, a connection, and a motive taking shape. When they pulled Langley's employment file, they learned he had been terminated just days before Zilpha went missing, after lying on his application about a past misdemeanor involving trespassing. Coincidentally, Langley had applied to rent a room in Zilpha's home months earlier, responding to a listing she had posted online. She had turned him down after a brief meeting, something her sister later recalled but hadn't thought to report. It was a rejection that, in hindsight, might have triggered a dangerous fixation. Langley had left town immediately after Zilpha disappeared, abandoning the storage unit and leaving no forwarding address. For 4 years, he had managed to vanish completely. But now, with his name and employment history uncovered, investigators launched a search that stretched across state lines. He had no social media, no active phone number, and no relatives that kept in touch. Still, they persisted, using old utility records and vehicle registration databases. Authorities tracked a used silver pickup truck, matching the one seen near Zilpha's home, to a small auto shop in Idaho, registered under the name Mark Elridge. The birthdate and social security number didn't match any official identity. It was a false alias. But the photograph on the driver's license was a match. Thomas Langley had changed his name, his look, and his life. Now, after years of silence, the man who had haunted Zilpha's final days had been found. And with him, the possibility of uncovering the full truth behind her murder. Thomas Langley was arrested in Idaho without incident. He was quiet, calm, and showed no emotion as authorities handcuffed him outside the small auto shop where he had been working under a false identity for years. His co-workers knew him as Mark, a polite but distant man who never spoke about his past. When questioned, Langley denied any connection to Zilpha Lowery. He claimed he had never been to North Carolina and insisted the detectives had the wrong person. But fingerprints taken at the time of arrest told a different story. They matched those found on tape and boxes inside the storage unit linked to Zilpha's case. Back in North Carolina, detectives now had more than just suspicion. They had physical evidence, DNA from Langley's skin cells found on Zilpha's gardening gloves, and a hair recovered from one of the bins that matched his genetic profile. Forensic specialists testified that these items were not simply left behind by accident. The way they were stored and handled showed clear intent to preserve them, possibly as trophies. Prosecutors believed Langley had developed an obsessive fixation on Zilpha after she rejected his room rental application. That rejection, combined with his job loss at the school, may have triggered a need for control he could only achieve through violence. During the pre-trial investigation, more connections emerged. Langley's internet search history, recovered from an old laptop found in the storage unit, included topics like how to erase digital footprints, shallow grave decomposition, and how to move a body unnoticed. These chilling searches were all made in the days leading up to Zilpha's disappearance. Detectives now believed that Langley had planned the abduction with extreme care, waiting for the right day, the right moment, and the least risk. Prosecutors pieced together a likely scenario. Langley followed Zilpha on the morning of April 16, 2011, intercepted her either near her home or along her regular route, and forced her into his vehicle. He may have held her captive for some time before ultimately killing her. The grave's remote location and the positioning of the body suggested someone who knew the terrain and wanted her to stay hidden for good. But what Langley never anticipated was that silver key, the one Zilpha had somehow managed to hold on to. It was small, easily overlooked, but critical. That one object led investigators straight to his secret world. Langley's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct link proving he killed her. But the jury didn't need a confession. The photographs, the storage unit, the timeline, and the DNA formed a chilling picture of obsession turned fatal. After a 2-week trial, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Langley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the town of Shadewell, justice had finally arrived after a decade of uncertainty. But the trial left an unease that lingered. Zilpha had lived her life quietly, kindly, harming no one. Yet even in a peaceful town, darkness had found its way in. Silent, calculated, and patient. After Thomas Langley was convicted, the courtroom emptied, but the weight of the past 10 years lingered in the hearts of those who had waited so long for answers. Zilpha Lowery's family sat quietly in the front row, hands clasped, eyes fixed ahead. There was relief, yes, but no real sense A victory. The truth had been unearthed, but it didn't undo the loss. Her sister later said it felt like grieving all over again, this time not for the unknown, but for the cruel reality of what had actually happened. In the weeks that followed the trial, new details emerged during follow-up investigations. Authorities revealed that Langley had purchased a cabin deep in the Smoky Mountains under another alias just a month before Zilpha disappeared. It had been abandoned for years when it was finally located, but signs pointed to it being used during that short window in April 2011. Scuff marks on the wooden floors, duct tape stuck under a table, and a torn section of curtain with traces of blood matching Zilpha's DNA told a grim story. Forensic teams couldn't determine exactly how long she was kept there, but they believed she may have been held for up to 3 days before being killed. The theory grew stronger when a journal belonging to Langley was discovered inside a locked drawer, half-burned in a rusted fire pit near the property. Though water-damaged and partially destroyed, some entries survived. They didn't name Zilpha directly, but the writing spoke of deserved silence and of finally owning something the world denied me. Those fragments were enough to solidify what had already been proven in court. Langley had planned every detail. He had stalked, abducted, and murdered her in a deliberate, unhurried manner, all while continuing to hide in plain sight for years. What no one could understand was how he managed to vanish so thoroughly, no digital trace, no close connections, and no apparent remorse. In the years since, Zilpha's story has been shared across the country. Her case became a model for long-term cold case strategies, especially the way a small clue, a forgotten key, led to the unraveling of a hidden crime. Law enforcement agencies highlighted the importance of storing physical evidence indefinitely, even in cases where hope seemed lost. The town of Shadewell, once shadowed by uncertainty, installed a memorial bench outside the school library where Zilpha had worked. Her name was etched into stone beneath an inscription. She was quiet, but she was never forgotten. Her family now runs a non-profit in her name, supporting victims of stalking and missing persons cases. They speak openly about how easily Zilpha's situation could have been dismissed, how obsession can hide behind ordinary faces, and how the smallest act, like holding onto a key, can become a lifeline to justice. Zilpha Lowery's life was taken, but her story, marked by patience, bravery, and one final act of defiance, continues to echo. In death, she uncovered the truth. And through that truth, she became more than a victim, she became a voice that could no longer be silenced.